3 years ago, I bought this Lund 202 Pro V GL for my guiding business and shooting YouTube videos. And we've been through a heck of a lot together in those 3 years.
Jeez.
The question is, would I buy it again? I'm a fishing guide and a YouTuber, and I fish big water on Lake Sakakawea in North Dakota. So I needed a boat that was fast, comfortable for all my clients when I had them in the boat, included all the electronics needed to catch fish, and was reliable after taking some beatings in rough water. There were a handful of things that I knew I wanted going into this process, and for context, I was coming from a Lund crossover 1875 to start with, so it was aluminum and it was a little bit smaller. I certainly wanted a bigger boat, and I didn't think that I could jump all the way up to a 22 footer, so I went with the 20, which the 202 essentially stands for 20.2 or 20 and 2 inches or something like that. This way it was not only more comfortable for me, but it also had more space for a bunch of my clients, and I'll get more to the space issue here in a minute. But I also wanted better boat control than what I had before, so in order to accomplish that, I wanted first a fiberglass boat because it's heavier and it tends to hold its position in wind and waves a lot better for that reason. I also wanted the advanced spot locking and contour following features, which most boats these days do have that, but I needed to get a new boat in order to make that upgrade. Basically any Minn Kota trolling motor these days has that tighter spot lock, and if you get the iPilot Link part of things, that allows you to do the contour following if you have a Lake Master chip to follow. But the other thing that can make a difference in terms of boat control is the way that the hull is designed. So my crossover didn't have a lot of what they call strakes, the runners on the bottom. The more strakes that you have, the more dig you have into the water, so to speak, and it holds your line better. So being fiberglass and also having that Pro V hull, which is kind of the ultimate walleye fishing hull, gives you that control that you're looking for. I certainly wanted this boat to go faster so we could get to different places quicker and easier. I was looking for something to get at least 50 miles per hour, so I knew I wanted like a 250 motor or a 300. It was up to me to decide what was in the budget, 250 versus 300. I also knew I wanted a kicker motor to help out with windy days and also for trolling crankbaits, but again, that's something you can get on any boat. And back to the space idea, I wanted more room for me and my clients, and this boat accomplished that in two different ways. One, it's fairly wide when compared to other boats in the market. So the extra width is a huge thing. And also, oddly enough, one of the selling points for me was the storage compartments on the side actually are removable. Most boats, that's not the case. And then lastly, I wanted way more rod storage than I had before. The crossover could hold 5 rods in a rod holder, then it had the ski area stuff. Well, Pro V has pretty amazing rod storage. Now, once I got the boat, obviously it was a huge upgrade from what I had before, but there were some struggles that I wound up going through, partially because it was a new boat and partially just because of this boat, and partially actually because of a global pandemic. I'll explain that here in a second. First of all, I had some issues with batteries. I have a battery problem. So these bigger boats that have more electronics and more things going on take a lot of juice. And one of the unique issues that I didn't expect, and some other people that not just got a Lund boat, but got something with a Mercury Pro XS found out, was that they came out with this electric power steering unit, which is wonderful and phenomenal and does all kinds of great things, makes it easier to drive, but it takes a lot of juice. And I don't know if they fully accounted for how much juice that was going to take. At any rate, I have a battery for my big motor, and then I have a battery for the kicker, which also runs the power steering and all the peripheral electronics. And that battery wound up dying on me quite early, and I had to replace it a series of times, and I actually made a separate video about that. So if you want more in depth on the battery issues that I experienced, you should go check that out instead. One of the things that was kind of a surprising disappointment was the depth of the storage locker. So you can hold 15 different rods in the rod locker, but I think it only goes out to like 8 foot or something like that. So I did have a couple of long, slightly telescoping lead core trolling rods that I think come down to 8.5 to 9 foot, and they don't quite fit in there. I was hoping that they would. There's other places along the side of the boat that you can store them, but it's a little clunkier. So I was hoping that'd be a little longer and have more depth to it, but it is what it is. Also, the fiberglass boats do have a little less rail space for ram mounts, rod holders, that kind of stuff. So if you got an aluminum, that whole thing's basically a rail system for you. On the fiberglass, they have to confine it to spots where they can place it in. So there are times where I wish I had a little more room for rod storage, rod holders and other things that I could place out there, but it's not really the end of the world. But then at times I've called this my COVID boat because I've had a series of weird issues with it that I didn't really expect, that I kind of chalk up to the COVID scenario when supply chains were low, available help for a lot of companies was low, so things weren't necessarily put together as well, and then they wanted to crank things out really fast to catch up, I think, and some of that stuff wound up being potentially below the normal quality specifications at times. These things included having too short of a cable for my kicker motor, so when I turned the steering wheel it yanked the cable right out of the head of the motor and killed the kicker. I had a bad side imaging transducer right out of the box that didn't work, which was a fairly easy fix, but I did have to go back to the shop to get a new transducer and replace that. Also, the screws that were used for the rub rail on the side that helps prevent dock rash were too short, so after a while of hitting waves in rough water, they kind of rattled out looser than they otherwise would have. I think that was just a supply chain problem where they didn't have enough screws that were long enough, so that was a thing for me too. And then I had a handful of different problems with my Altera trolling motor, and again, I made a separate video about that you can check out if you want to see more details about it. But the one thing that was very COVID related is when I was fixing it at one point in time, the guy repairing it said it looked like one of the belts wasn't fit to the right specifications, potentially because they didn't have the right workforce in at the time and somebody else was doing it, and it wore out faster than it otherwise would have. And then the last thing, which isn't really a COVID related thing to my knowledge anyway, was the fact that there just appeared to be a bad weld on the front of the trailer, and I ended up loading my boat one day and the thing cracked and collapsed. Again, this isn't a Lund thing, at least in my case, it's a boat made trailer. I don't know if it's just mine, if it's an issue that they had with other boats, but it was a problem for me. Oh, and I also had a bad charging bank on my trolling motor battery charger. Like 2 or 3 months in, it just stopped charging the batteries on one of the banks, so we had to replace the charger, which was, you know, most of these things were under warranty, which was nice, but still stuff you have to deal with. There were a few pleasant surprises though, other than the difficulties that I dealt with. One of them being those compartments that I thought was kind of a selling point for me that I thought I would remove. I actually wound up not removing them. I mean, the boat's wide enough and it has plenty of space, and it's nice to have that storage there, so still a nice feature, but I've almost never taken them out. Also, I happen to go with the trim tabs on this boat, which again, you can get trim tabs on any boat, but just as a side note, highly recommend the trim tabs, especially if you're driving in rough water or if you have a lot of people in your boat and you want to level out the load or get on plane quicker. Trim tabs are a game changer and a dream. I don't think I'd ever get a boat without trim tabs now. And then as far as the speed of the boat, I kind of expected 50, 52 miles an hour out of the 250 engine, and actually I can get up to 56 by myself. Definitely plenty fast enough to get around the lake in a hurry when I need to. Yes, there are motors and engines. You know, you can get a 400, you can go 60 miles an hour if you want to, but I don't know, 56 is plenty for me. And this isn't super scientifically tested, but in terms of gas mileage, I expected to get a lot less, and it seemed like it was still kind of on par with my crossover boat, which is surprising. That was a 150 engine on an aluminum boat, but I didn't really seem to have a huge drop in that. I don't know, take that with a grain of salt, because again, I didn't specifically test it and chart it and track it to a T, but it was better than I expected. So like with any big product that you buy, there's going to be some lessons learned, and there's definitely things that I got out of this experience that I would do differently next time around or keep an eye on when I'm buying a boat. First of all, I think it's really important that everybody kind of understands the batteries that are going into it, both the person buying it as well as the dealership, and they don't necessarily know exactly how you're using it if you aren't able to explain that to them. So it's a really good thing to know all the different electricity draws that all your electronics have and your graphs and everything that you might add on to it later to get a feel for whether or not that battery can actually handle it. And in my case, again, the power steering was a huge thing. In terms of how we solved that power steering problem, when we disconnected the kicker from the power steering so that I didn't really need power steering with the kicker. I could just use it straight. I often drive with my trolling motor. It's kind of a four-wheel drive scenario. So that's one hack that you can use if you have one of these Mercury Pro XS engines. Also, I've learned that brand new boats are not like brand new cars. I think most cars are very off the shelf. There's a lot of customizable features, but in terms of how they run, that's pretty standard. But when it comes to boats, again, it depends so much on what stuff you put in the boat, how you use it, how often you drive around graphing, how often you use the kicker motor, the trolling motor. And if you start adding a bunch of electronics later on, the batteries might have been fine for what you had and now they're not. So I think it's, again, really important for both you and the dealer to understand rigging, batteries, how much power draw everything has. Any boat could be great, but if it's not rigged properly or vice versa, you know what I mean? Rigging is a huge deal is what I'm trying to say. Also, this boat, as well as potentially others, didn't come standard with the digital meters that have readouts for everything. Most importantly, the motor hours. So I really didn't know what my motor hours were and was taking a guess at it. So then after I did my first oil change and I was a little higher on the hours than I wanted to be, I realized I need to get a view in that. Well, they do have a thing called the Mercury Vessel View, which you can set up a little module in your engine, under the cowling, and then it connects to your iPhone with an app or whatever phone you have. So that's been a game changer for me to get an idea of not only motor hours, but all kinds of other things and allowing you to track maintenance and all that kind of stuff. Mercury Vessel View, game changer. And also as far as the Altera, I think an Altera is great for the weekend fisherman, but when it comes to a guide, it just became too unreliable for me. And a lot of that for me specifically had to do with the fact that I drive on a lot of dirt and gravel roads, and that creates a lot of issues when that stuff starts to get into the internals of the motor in terms of it deploying and stowing. So Alteras are wonderful until they're not. So with all that being said, the big question, would I buy it again? Yes, I absolutely would. So first of all, I have a little bit of a bias. I happen to love Lund boats. That's what I've owned in the past. That's what my dad owned. That's, you know, a lot of people go through that. So it just feels good. It's the boat that I wanted, and I was hoping that it would stack up and be the right boat for me, and it turned out to be. Second, like I said, I love the wider space and the fact that you can remove compartments. I just love having space. I don't want to feel cramped. One of the other boats that I think can set up really, really well, that looks good, that runs hard, are the Warrior boats. But from what I've seen, they're very narrow. So they're very, very long, but they're also narrow. So if you have people sitting side by side, it's a little harder to walk around each other, and it just feels cramped to me. Another boat that I think runs extremely well is a Yarcraft boat. But again, the setup, what I found is great for a couple of people, but when you have 4 people plus a guide, it just didn't set up well, especially for trolling. So this setup was ideal for what I saw, especially if you got a lot of people in the boat. And also, despite the problems that I've had with that power steering in terms of the battery draw, it is pretty awesome, especially when you're just idling and graphing, because as you're going slow, that wheel would get really hard to turn if you didn't have power steering, but it's so smooth. Or if you're loading the boat in rough water, game changer. Again, not necessarily a Lund specific thing, it has to do with the motor that you have, but Lund typically works with Mercury, and in this case, that was the package that I got. And that's kind of the theme here. Like, I talked through some of the challenges that I've had, but so many of them were not Lund specific. Again, the power steering, it's a Mercury motor thing. The Altera problems I was having, that's a Minn Kota thing. The trailer problem that I had, it was a boat-made trailer. It's not a Lund trailer. And then all those weird COVID issues that I was having probably are one-off things that wouldn't reoccur very often. Like, anything can happen, but I wouldn't expect that to be the norm. So the rub rail stuff and the short cable and all those other issues, I wouldn't expect to happen the next time around. And yeah, I had some challenges with the rigging and picking batteries, but again, that's a challenge for any boat that you buy. When you're customizing something, things can get complicated. And then what it boils down to is the ride is just so incredibly smooth. It was so much better in rougher water than my aluminum boat was. And one other neat feature about it is the way the front of the hull is designed. It has a lot of wide, I'm not good with boat technicals, but it gets very wide at the front of the bow, which helps to roll over waves. And I didn't really know if that was actually going to be the fact, but it does seem like it rolls water very well. It's a very dry boat. We don't get wet very much at all, unless you got a big crosswind and the wind spraying the water over you, but that's not the boat's problem, you know what I mean? It spot locks like a dream, it trolls like a dream, it runs straight and true. It's a game changer for me for boat control, incredibly game changing. I absolutely love the boat when it comes to that. And finally, it just looks great. Like, I need to keep it up and keep it looking great, but out of the shop, like, it's a sharp boat. I love everything about Lunds, always have. So that's just a nice bonus. So if you are thinking about getting a new boat or upgrading your boat or whatever, take it for what it's worth. But I've had 400 days on the water with this thing after 3 years, and I'd buy it again. So if you found this video helpful, please hit the like button to say so, maybe subscribe to the channel, and how about you watch some of my fishing videos? Maybe they're helpful too. Later, fisher people.